March 11th, 2020, the Ottawa Senators against the Los Angeles Kings. That was the game that decided pretty much everything. And I say that because both of these teams have such a deciding history with what happened on that day that I wanted to make an entire video just dedicated to that game. Now, okay, Lego, what are you talking about in the title here? The Ottawa Senators and the Kings, second and third overall, Byfield and Stutzle? What are you going on about here? Well, let's talk a little bit about the 2020 NHL Draft. So, in the draft, we have ourselves the 3 lotteries that are given to teams based on the ping-pong balls. We all know how the draft went. It went first overall belongs to an unidentified play-in series team that is yet to be determined. Second overall was the LA Kings first-round pick that moved up to second. And then third overall was the San Jose Sharks first-round pick that belonged to the Ottawa Senators from the Erik Karlsson trade. After the 3 lotteries, the rest of the picks that weren't chosen for lotteries get slotted in via points percentage into the remaining spots. So you have Detroit, who was the worst team in the NHL in the 2019-20 season, sliding down to 4th overall. Ottawa, with their own first-round pick, slid from 2nd to 5th. Then you go down the list, etc. So ultimately, it is the 3rd worst winning percentage team in the San Jose Sharks that moves up. The LA Kings pick, which was the 4th worst in the NHL, moves up to number 2, and then a play-in series loser goes up to number 1, which we will not talk about. But when it comes to that 2nd overall pick, it's actually that one game played on March 11th that changed everything. Because that was the last hockey game played between the LA Kings and the Ottawa Senators, and it was against each other. Let's take a moment and pause everything up before we get into what actually happened, because if we take a look at what things were like after at the draft lottery, we already established what happened. 4th last moved up to 2nd overall, and the 3rd last Sharks pick stayed at 3rd overall. And heading into this game, things were actually a little bit different in terms of the actual standings. For one, the LA Kings were on a 6-game winning streak, meaning that they jumped all the way up to 62 points after being down at 48 points 6 games ago. And the Ottawa Senators, while they were winning a few games here and there, wins against Vancouver, wins against Detroit, and then a few losses mixed in with a few other wins, but it was really the LA Kings' big surge towards the end that propelled them forward into what was their eventual 4th last in the league spot. But that last game, man, that was the big one. Because in that last game of the season, the LA Kings won their 7th straight against the Ottawa Senators, which allowed them to leapfrog the Ottawa Senators in the standings and the San Jose Sharks, up into the spot that eventually became 4th overall. If things were different, though, and instead, if Ottawa won this game in regulation, then the reverse would have been true. And that's kind of crazy, because if the Ottawa Senators won this game in regulation, they would have had 64 points in 71 games, making them 4th last in the league in points percentage, and the LA Kings, instead of being 4th last, would have been 2nd last, and their draft pick would have dropped to 5th overall. Ottawa would have gotten 2nd and 3rd because the San Jose pick that they also owned would not have changed from 3rd overall in the standings. And that is how Ottawa could have had both Stutzle and Byfield in the same draft, and it all depended on one hockey game. It's kind of crazy taking a look at all this stuff in retrospect, isn't it? If the Senators won that last game of the season, they would have drafted 2nd and 3rd. But if they lost, they would have drafted 5th and 3rd, which is where we are right now. And a lot of this great stuff comes off of the LA Kings story and how they were able to string together 7 wins to end off the regular season. A lot of that does have to do with the emergence of Gabe Vilardi and Martin Frk, who both got called up to the LA Kings and who both displayed some really good chemistry with each other. Gabe Vilardi, we already made a video talking about Gabe Vilardi and the redemption of Gabe Vilardi. The thumbnail of this video was something that I thought was really hot, but nobody actually gave me any props for it. Maybe because movie references could sometimes be lost in translation, but Vilardi's been a guy that we've already talked about and he's been doing pretty well, and Martin Frk is actually the guy who scored the game-winning goal in that game against the Sens. He's a guy who won the AHL's fastest slapshot award, and apparently his slapshot is faster than Shea Weber's, which, that's weird. He's a 26-year-old forward, and this guy has a better slapper than Shea Weber? Darn, like, Weber had a 106 mile per hour slap shot at the NHL skills competition, but Martin Frk at the AHL skills competition had a 109 slap shot. Man, that's crazy. But this guy has honestly been one of the more underrated Los Angeles Kings players in the organization, and eventually getting called up, he's the guy who scored the game-winning goal. And of course, in poetic fashion, it was Drew Doughty and Gabe Vilardi who assisted on that Frk goal. And that's it. That's the ultimate dagger that the LA Kings needed to draft Quinton Byfield second overall. Or, you know, Tim Stutzle, take your pick. Or maybe even Lafreniere second overall, who knows? But because this team got so lucky and they started winning games towards the end, it ultimately set them up to be in the draft position that would eventually be granted the second overall pick. And that's kind of funny how it works, isn't it? I saw LA fans all over Twitter and Reddit complaining during that win streak. Why are we winning games? I love it, but like, Lafreniere, Byfield, we're dropping in the draft lottery standings, and I saw Ottawa Senators fans saying things like, yeah, go LA, we're cheering for you guys, because both of our first round picks are now underneath you guys, and just above Detroit in the standings, both that San Jose and the Ottawa pick, which is why I remember watching the LA and the Ottawa game, and it was kind of funny, because both of these fan bases were kind of cheering for the other team, in some respect, because they were like, yeah, you can take the 2 points. We don't need them. We want to get a higher draft lottery odds. But of course, with hindsight and all that stuff combined, we now know that that win streak for the Kings was actually their best gift. Because now, no matter who they take, they're going to get a very, very good player. In my opinion, the draft this year can be divided up into a few tiers. At the top, you have Alexis Lafreniere, who is supposed to be in his own tier, but some people say he's probably not. And then you have Byfield and Stutzle, who can kind of intertwine into their own tier, and then fading out into that, you have the Rossi, the Raymond, and the other players all in another third tier. And the LA Kings, from all the projections, were not really supposed to be in a top 2 spot to draft one of the top tier players in this entry draft. But alas, they are. And it's instead Ottawa who drops down to 3rd and 5th overall. But can you imagine that, though? What if, instead of Martin Frk coming in and sealing the deal of the Los Angeles Kings, it's the Ottawa Senators that win that game instead? What if their first-round pick goes up to 2nd overall, the San Jose pick, which they own, stays at 3rd, and they draft both Stutzle and Byfield? Man, they would automatically propel themselves to 1st in terms of all the NHL prospect pools in the entire league. And it would not even be close. Byfield, Stutzle, not to mention the future with Bronstrom and Tkachuk and Chabot and Lassie Thompson and Bernard Docker. Oh my goodness, not to mention Logan Brown and Josh Norris and... oh man. A first line of Stutzle, Byfield, and Tkachuk. Yikes, I can't even imagine that. That would be crazy. That would be absolutely crazy. But ultimately, having Lafreniere go to one team, Byfield to another team, Stutzle to a 3rd team, and then, what? Any of the other guys going to Ottawa, Rossi, Perfetti, Drysdale, Raymond, whoever. Instead, that seems more like a parody-inducing kind of situation. So, for the sake of the entire NHL, I'm happy that things gone on this way, especially the fact that LA was able to actually win their way towards that 2nd overall pick. But at the same time, it does kind of sting if you take a look at it in hindsight. It's just, you know, at this kind of time, it's one of the things where you got to take a look at the positives instead of the negatives. Hey, Ottawa did not lose Byfield and got a Rossi instead. They're getting the opportunity to just get a Rossi. That's kind of how I see it, which is why I don't really feel as bad talking about it. But tell me what you think in the comment section below about this one hockey game between the Sens and the Kings, and how it ultimately influenced who got the 2nd overall pick. I'm looking forward to all the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. So that's 99. And bye.